My daughter screamed, "Get out of my life." And each word was like a dagger twisting into my 65 years of absolute devotion. I was standing in the living room of our home, surrounded by wedding dress catalogs scattered across the floor like wilted petals, while Jessica pointed at me with a finger trembling with rage. Connor, her fiancé, smirked from the sofa with an expression of satisfaction that I now understand was that of a man who already believed he owned everything that was mine. "You never understand anything, Mom. You're just in the way." Her shouts echoed off the walls I had painted myself 20 years ago, in this house I built, brick by brick, working double shifts at the textile mill. The afternoon had grown heavy, the air thick like bitter honey, and I remained silent as she continued to spew venom. The words flew from her mouth like bullets aimed straight at my heart. But something strange happened in that moment. I stopped bleeding on the inside. A cold, almost surgical calm began to settle in my chest. I didn't cry. I just clenched my car keys until their ridges dug into my palm, feeling the warm metal against my skin, while Connor nodded in approval at every insult my own daughter hurled at me. "Your mother is so dramatic," he whispered to Jessica, but I heard every word. His eyes gleamed with a greed I should have recognized months ago, back when he started showing up at the house more often, measuring spaces with his gaze and asking about documents that were none of his business. The next day, very early, when the dew still beaded on my bedroom windows and the city was barely stirring with its first sounds, I put on my best navy blue coat and walked to the bank. My steps were firm on the damp pavement, each one a decision I was making for the first time in decades, just for myself. The morning air had that crispness that cleans your lungs and clears your mind, and for the first time in months, I felt I could breathe all the way in. The bank teller gave me a strange look when I asked her to block all the additional credit cards I had given to Jessica over the years. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard as she reviewed the list. The main card, the emergency card, the one for online shopping, all those little pieces of plastic I had handed over with motherly love, which I now understood had been golden chains binding me to a silent exploitation. "Are you sure, Mrs. Morales?" "There are several cards, and some have pending purchases," she asked in a soft voice, leaning forward with that professional look of concern they use when they think you're making a mistake. "Completely sure," I replied, and my voice sounded different, as if I had found a register I had lost long ago. The words came out with a firmness that surprised even me, as if they had been waiting for years to be spoken with such conviction. When I left the bank, the morning sun warmed my face in a way I couldn't remember feeling in years. It was as if I had woken up from a very long dream, one where I was just a shadow who paid bills and cooked meals for people who had forgotten to thank me. Each ray of light seemed to pierce through layers of accumulated exhaustion, illuminating corners of my soul I thought were lost forever. I returned home and sat in my favorite armchair by the window, the one that looks out onto the garden where I planted jasmine when Jessica was little and still hugged me before she went to sleep. My phone started ringing insistently, my daughter's name flashing on the screen again and again like a desperate plea. But for the first time in my life, I didn't run to answer it. Each ring was like a distant echo of a life that no longer belonged to me, a tune I had danced to for decades but had finally decided to stop listening to. There was something profoundly liberating in that voluntary silence, in my own disobedience to the expectations of others. The house felt different that morning, as if it had reclaimed its original soul, the one it had when it was just mine and not a stage for someone else's drama. 2 weeks before Jessica screamed at me in my own home, everything had seemed normal. She had arrived on a Saturday morning with a radiant smile, carrying bags from an expensive downtown bakery and a bouquet of flowers that surely cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. "Mom, I brought you your favorites," she said, kissing my cheek with a sweetness I now recognize as calculated. The roses were perfect, too perfect, as if they had been chosen not for love, but for the image they projected. Connor followed a few minutes later, carrying a bottle of sparkling wine, and that smile that had always struck me as odd. It never reached his eyes. It just hung on his lips like a poorly fitted mask. "Mrs. Morales, you look radiant," he said, and though his words sounded kind, there was something in his tone that made me feel like I was being appraised, like an object at an auction. I should have paid attention to how his eyes scanned my living room, lingering on the glass cabinet where I keep the family photos, on the solid wood sideboard I inherited from my mother. "We have wonderful news," Jessica announced, taking my hands in hers. Her fingers were cold despite the morning warmth, and she wore a new ring that glittered with an ostentation that made me blink. "Connor officially proposed, Mom. We want a wedding like the one I've always dreamed of, like the one you never got to have." That last sentence lodged in my chest like a splinter. It was true my wedding had been simple, almost austere, but it had been beautiful because it was filled with genuine love. Now, I wonder if that comparison was intentional, if even then she was planting the seeds of guilt she would later use to manipulate me. Connor settled onto my sofa as if he owned it, draping his arms over the back with a familiarity that made me uncomfortable. "Jessica has told me so much about you, about everything you've done for her. A mother like you deserves to see her daughter get married in style." His words sounded rehearsed, like a speech he had practiced in the mirror. Every compliment came wrapped in an implicit request. Every smile was an invoice piling up somewhere in my future. "We've been looking at reception venues," Jessica continued, pulling out her phone and showing me pictures of lavish country clubs, with crystal chandeliers and tables draped in linens that looked like they cost more than my monthly salary. "This one is perfect, Mom. It can hold 200 people. It has a garden for photos. And the menu—" Her eyes sparkled as she described dishes with names I couldn't pronounce, wines I had only seen in luxury magazines. The number, 200 people, hit me like a silent slap. I knew maybe 20 people in her current circle. "That must cost a fortune," I murmured. But my words were lost in Jessica's manufactured enthusiasm as she swiped through photos as if she hadn't heard me. Connor nodded at each picture, making comments about the quality of the service, the exclusivity of the place, the importance of making a good impression. "You only get married once, right?" he said, winking at me. "You have to do it right." It was then I noticed that Connor had been looking at my house with too much attention. His eyes lingered on the deed to the house, which I had left on the dining room table after reviewing some property tax documents. He sauntered over, pretending to admire the family photos, but I saw his fingers brush against the document. "What a beautiful home, Mrs. Morales. It must be worth a fortune in today's market." "It's my home," I replied, and something in my tone must have alerted him because he backed away quickly, resuming his performance as the perfect son-in-law. But I had seen that look, that silent appraisal of my assets. It was the same look I'd seen at the bank when I applied for a loan years ago. The look that calculates numbers and possibilities, not the one that appreciates memories and feelings. Jessica came over to me with that smile I now recognize as dangerous. "Mom, I need to ask you a favor." "Well, it's not really a favor. It's more like an investment in my happiness." Her words were carefully chosen, each one strategically placed to make me feel selfish if I refused. "We need some help with the wedding expenses. You know Connor is just starting his business. And Her voice broke slightly, as if she were holding back tears. "I just want you to be proud of me." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken expectations. Connor watched me with that smile I now understand was predatory. And Jessica waited for my answer, her eyes shining with tears that seemed far too convenient. I should have said no right then. I should have trusted that inner voice screaming at me that something was wrong. But a mother's love, that blind, sacrificial love I had cultivated for 35 years, made me nod. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll do whatever I can so you can have the wedding of your dreams," I told them that morning. And the words left my mouth as if they were automatic, programmed by decades of giving everything for my daughter. I saw how Connor's eyes lit up with a satisfaction that should have alarmed me, and how Jessica hugged me with an effusiveness that I now understand was more relief than gratitude. "I knew I could count on you, Mom. You're the best mother in the world." It was the next day that things started to get strange. Jessica arrived with a folder full of quotes, pro forma invoices, and contracts that just needed a little signature. "This is to book everything quickly, Mom. The best places get snapped up so fast," she explained, as she spread the papers across my dining room table. The same table where I had done homework with her when she was little. The numbers danced before my eyes like impossible figures. The venue, the caterer, the flowers, the photographer, the band, each line item was a small fortune that added up to a mountain of expenses that would keep me up at night for years. "Don't you think this is a bit Excessive? I asked, pointing to the cost of the floral centerpieces, which was equivalent to 3 months of my pension. Jessica sighed with that feigned patience adults use when explaining something obvious to a child. Mom, it's my wedding. I'm only going to get married once. Besides, you never had this. Don't you want me to be happy? The guilt settled in my chest like a hot stone. She was right. I'd never had a lavish wedding. My marriage had been a simple ceremony in the little neighborhood church, with a family lunch afterward. But it had been beautiful because it was filled with genuine love. Not this calculated spectacle they were presenting to me. Connor started showing up more and more frequently, always with new ideas for the wedding that required more money. Mrs. Morales, I found the best band in the city. They play at celebrity weddings, he'd say, showing me videos on his phone of musicians who looked like they stepped out of a Hollywood movie. We just need a deposit to lock them in. His hands moved in broad gestures as he talked, as if he were selling a dream. But I was starting to see the cracks in his performance. His shoes were expensive, but they were scuffed. His watch was flashy, but it was a cheap knockoff. And he always had an excuse for not paying for any of the expenses himself. It was a Thursday afternoon when I discovered the first real lie. Jessica had left her purse open on my sofa while she went to the bathroom, and her phone buzzed with a message. I didn't mean to read it, but the screen lit up right in front of my eyes, and I saw Connor's name followed by words that froze my blood. It's all set. The old lady is paying for everything. After the wedding, we can pressure her for the house. My hands started to tremble. I read the message again and again, hoping I had misunderstood. But the words remained there, unchangeable as a verdict. The old lady. That's what the man who was going to marry my daughter called me. The man who smiled and called me Mrs. Morales with false respect. And the house, my house, the home I had built with so much effort, was part of their plans. When Jessica came back from the bathroom, I acted as if nothing had happened. I smiled. I nodded at her new wedding ideas. I signed another check for the photographer who absolutely had to be that one, because his style was unique. But inside, something had shifted. It was as if I had woken up from a deep sleep and started seeing things with a painful clarity. Every smile from Connor seemed more fake. Every hug from Jessica felt more calculated. Every new request for money sounded more rehearsed. I started paying attention to things I had ignored before, like the way Connor would size up my antique furniture, or how Jessica would make comments about how cluttered my house was, suggesting that maybe I needed help getting organized. Mom, you don't have the energy you used to. Maybe you should consider moving into something smaller, more manageable, she told me one afternoon while pretending to help me dust the kitchen shelves. This house is perfect for me, I replied, but she insisted with that smile I now recognize as manipulative. But think about it, Mom. All this space just for you. You could sell it and have money to enjoy yourself, to travel, to... Her words trailed off when she saw my expression. For the first time in weeks, I didn't give in to her suggestions. I didn't smile complacently. I just looked at her with a coldness that seemed to surprise her. That night, alone in my bed, I reviewed all the checks I had signed in the last few weeks. The sum was terrifying. It represented years of savings, of skipped meals, of clothes I didn't buy, of outings I didn't take. All that money I had saved for my old age, for emergencies, for a little security, was evaporating into a wedding that was beginning to look more like a scam than a celebration. It was then that I began to truly see what was happening. It wasn't just an expensive wedding. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to drain my accounts and eventually take my house. And I, like a fool in love with the idea of being the perfect mother, had been financing my own destruction. The escalation began the following week, when Connor arrived at my house with a new folder and that smile I had already learned to fear. Mrs. Morales, I have incredible news, he announced, settling onto my sofa as if he owned it. The venue had a last-minute cancellation, and they can give us a better date, but we need to confirm today. His eyes shone with a manufactured urgency as he spread out contracts that required my immediate signature. Jessica appeared behind him, looking both radiant and nervous. Mom, it's perfect. It's a Saturday instead of a Friday. So many more people can come, but the cost. Her voice trailed off as she pointed to a figure that made me feel dizzy. It was double what we had already spent, an amount that represented practically all of my life savings. "We just need you to sign here and here," Connor said, pointing to lines marked with little X's. "And we can have the wedding of our dreams. Can't you wait a little?" "I need to look at my finances," I murmured. But Connor shook his head with that look of false concern he had perfected. "Unfortunately not, Mrs. Morales. Another client is waiting for our answer. If we don't sign today, we lose the opportunity forever." Jessica came closer and took my hands, her eyes filling with tears that seemed far too timely. "Please, Mom, you know how important this is to me. After everything I've been through, after all my failures, this is my chance to be happy." I signed. God forgive me, but I signed those papers that mortgaged my future because I couldn't bear to see my daughter cry, or what I thought were genuine tears. Because now I understand that Jessica had learned to use my feelings as weapons against me. The moment the ink dried on my signature, I saw Connor exchange a triumphant glance with Jessica, a silent communication that completely excluded me. 2 days later, Connor started showing up at my house unannounced. I was just in the neighborhood, he'd say, but he always ended up staying the whole afternoon, making business calls from my living room, using my Wi-Fi, eating from my refrigerator. "I hope you don't mind, Mrs. Morales. Jessica told me you love the company." But I had never said that. In fact, I was starting to value my moments of solitude more and more, especially when he wasn't there, appraising my belongings with that calculating gaze. "You know, Mrs. Morales," he said one afternoon while scrolling on his phone on my sofa, "Jessica and I have been thinking about the future. After the wedding, we'll need a bigger place to start our family." His words sounded casual, but there was something premeditated in the way he said them, as if he had been rehearsing this moment. "This house is perfect for a young family. It has plenty of space, a good neighborhood, and it's in excellent condition." "It's my home," I replied, but he continued as if he hadn't heard me. Of course, but think about it. You, all alone in this whole house. It must be a lot of work to maintain. You must get very lonely sometimes." I didn't feel lonely until he started showing up constantly, filling my space with his invasive presence and his unsolicited plans. "We could work out an arrangement that benefits everyone. You could move into a comfortable apartment, easier to maintain. And we could stay here, taking care of the place." The following week, Jessica came with a proposal that left me speechless. "Mom, Connor and I have been reviewing our finances, and I think it would be a good idea for you to add me as a co-owner on your bank accounts, just in case, for emergencies." Her voice was sweet, but there was an underlying insistence that made me feel like I was being lulled into a trap. "At your age, it's important to have someone who can help you with these things." "At my age, I'm 65, not 90, I replied with more sharpness than I'd intended. "I manage my own affairs perfectly well." But she insisted with that smile I now recognize as manipulative. "Of course you do, Mom. But think of it as a precaution. And besides, it would be easier for the wedding expenses. You wouldn't have to keep signing checks all the time." Connor nodded from his permanent position on my sofa. "It's very common, Mrs. Morales. My mother did the same with me. It's just a formality, a way to simplify things." But I remembered his mother. A woman who had lost control of her finances when he moved into her house and who now lived practically like a guest in her own home. It was that night that I found Connor in my kitchen, going through the papers I kept in the drawer for important documents. "Sorry, Mrs. Morales," he said when he saw me. "I was looking for a glass of water, and the drawer just sort of fell open." But I had seen him, photographing my documents with his phone, looking over my deeds and my bank statements, with the thoroughness of someone taking inventory. "What are you really doing?" I asked. And for the first time since I'd met him, his mask slipped a little. "Just trying to understand the overall financial situation so I can better help with the wedding expenses," he answered, but he no longer sounded convincing. His smile had become forced, and his eyes had a hardness that I now recognized as the true personality behind the act. The next day, Jessica arrived with the news that they had found the perfect dress at an exclusive boutique. "It costs a little more than we had planned," she admitted. "But Mom, when I put it on, even the sales lady cried. It's like it was made for me." The price of the dress was obscene, equivalent to 6 months of my pension, but she had already put it on hold and just needed me to go pay the deposit. Jessica, this is getting out of control, I finally said, and her expression changed from sweet to dangerous in seconds. Out of control? Mom, it's my wedding, the only one I'm ever going to have. Are you telling me I'm not worth it? Her words were daggers wrapped in reproach, each one designed to make me feel like the worst mother in the world. And it worked, because despite everything, despite the alarm bells screaming in my head, I went to the boutique and paid for that dress that cost more than my car. That night, after paying for the dress, I returned home with the feeling that I had crossed an invisible line from which I could not return. I sat on my bed, surrounded by invoices and receipts for a wedding that seemed to have become a monster devouring my future. And I made a decision that would change everything. I took out my phone and dialed the number of my lawyer, the same one who had handled the purchase of my house 20 years ago. Mr. Hayes, it's Elsa Morales. I need to see you urgently, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. It's about my documents, my properties. I think I need to protect my assets. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then his professional but warm voice reassured me. Of course, Mrs. Morales. Can you come in tomorrow morning? And bring all the documents you have, especially anything you've signed recently. The next day, while Jessica and Connor thought I was at the grocery store, I went to Mr. Hayes' office. The building was old but solid, like my lawyer, and his office smelled of legal paper and strong coffee. Tell me what's going on, he said. And for the first time in weeks, someone listened to me without judging, without trying to convince me of anything, without a hidden agenda behind their words. I told him everything. The excessive wedding expenses, Connor's constant visits, his comments about my house, the pressure for Jessica to be a co-owner of my accounts. I laid out all the contracts I had signed, all the checks I had written, and spread them across his desk like evidence of my own naivete. Mrs. Morales, he said after reviewing everything carefully, you are the victim of what we call familial financial abuse. It's more common than you think. But what can I do? She's my daughter, I said, and the words came out heavy with all the guilt and pain I had been accumulating. A mother's love doesn't mean you have to destroy yourself financially, he answered with a gentleness that made me cry for the first time in weeks. We are going to protect your assets. We are going to ensure that no one can make financial decisions in your name without your explicit consent. That afternoon, as I walked back home, I felt different. It was as if I had found an invisible suit of armor protecting me from manipulation. I had a plan now, documents to back up my decisions, and more importantly, I had the certainty that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been right all along. When I got home, I found Connor and Jessica in my living room, surrounded by more catalogs and contracts. Mom, good, you're here, Jessica said with that smile I could now see for what it really was, a tool of manipulation. Connor found the perfect florist, but we need to make the deposit today. His eyes shone with that manufactured urgency I knew so well. How much? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Only $15,000, Connor replied, as if it were an insignificant amount. It's for all the flowers for the ceremony and the reception. Believe me, Mrs. Morales, it's going to be spectacular. Your daughter is going to look like a princess. But I was no longer listening to his empty promises. I was calculating that $15,000 represented almost a year of my pension. I need to think about it, I told them, and I saw them exchange an alarmed glance. Think about it? Jessica repeated, her voice having lost all its sweetness. Mom, we've already talked about this. It's my wedding. You can't change your mind now. But for the first time in months, I wasn't intimidated by her tone. I can change my mind whenever I want. It's my money. Connor stood up from the sofa, his expression no longer trying to hide his irritation. Mrs. Morales, I think you're being a little selfish. Jessica is your only daughter. Don't you want to see her happy? His words were the same as always, but now they sounded hollow, like a broken record that had lost its power to persuade. I want to see my daughter happy, I replied, but not at the cost of my financial security. Your financial security? Jessica jumped to her feet, and for the first time, I saw genuine rage in her eyes, not the calculated tears from before. Mom, you have this house, you have savings, you have your pension. What more do you need at your age? I'm starting my life. I have the right to have something beautiful for once. And I have the right not to be left in poverty to finance your spectacle, I answered, and the words came out with a force that surprised me. The silence that followed was tense, charged with all the things we had been avoiding saying. Connor's fists were clenched, and Jessica looked at me as if I were a stranger. "Fine," Connor finally said, his voice dangerously calm. "I understand you need time to think about it. But, Mrs. Morales, I hope you understand that some commitments have already been made, some contracts have already been signed. You can't back out now without consequences." His words sounded like a barely veiled threat. "Are you threatening me in my own house?" I asked, and his mask slipped completely. "It's not a threat, Mrs. Morales. It's reality. You've signed contracts, you've made commitments. You can't just decide you don't want to honor them anymore." Jessica nodded, and I saw a hardness in her face I had never seen before, as if she were finally showing her true personality. That night, after they left, I stayed awake reviewing all the papers Mr. Hayes had given me. I had options, I had rights, and more importantly, I had the determination to use them. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a 65-year-old woman who had worked her whole life, who had raised a daughter, who had built a home, and who was not going to let anyone strip her of all that without a fight. The next morning, as the sun barely peeked through my bedroom curtains, I began to execute my plan with the quiet precision of someone who has made a definitive decision. It was Saturday, and I knew Connor and Jessica would sleep in, which gave me time to do what I needed without interruption. I dressed in my best navy blue suit, the one I saved for important occasions, because I sensed this day would mark a before and an after in my life. My first stop was the bank. The same teller who had blocked the credit cards greeted me with a professional smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Morales. How can I help you today?" I explained that I needed to review all the transactions on my accounts for the last 3 months and get certified copies of each one. I also need to change all my access codes and stipulate that no one but me can make transactions on my accounts, I said, sliding the documents Mr. Hayes had prepared for me across the counter. While I waited for the bank statements, I checked my phone and found 12 missed calls from Jessica and 5 messages from Connor. "Mom, where are you? We need to talk about the flowers urgently." "Mrs. Morales, the florist is waiting for an answer. We can't waste any more time." But for the first time in months, I didn't feel the manufactured urgency they were trying to transmit. Their emergencies were no longer my emergencies. On my way home, I stopped at a Best Buy and bought a small digital recorder. The salesman, a kind young man, showed me how to use it. "It's really easy. You just press this button and it records everything. The battery lasts for hours and the sound quality is excellent." I paid him in cash and put the device in my purse, feeling as if I had just bought a secret weapon. When I arrived home, Connor and Jessica were already waiting for me in my living room. They had used the key I had given my daughter years ago, back when I still believed it was for genuine emergencies. I now understood that key had been just another form of access they had been exploiting. "Mom, where were you? We've been waiting all morning," Jessica said with poorly concealed impatience. "I was taking care of some personal business," I replied, discreetly activating the recorder as I sat in my favorite armchair. "Business that should include us?" Connor interjected with that authority he had been gradually assuming in my house. "We're family, Mrs. Morales. You shouldn't be making important decisions without consulting us." His words revealed just how far they had gone in their invasion of my autonomy. "Connor, you aren't my family yet, and when you are, you still won't have the right to an opinion on my finances," I said with a calmness that seemed to disconcert him. Jessica intervened quickly, as if they had rehearsed this conversation. "Mom, you're acting very strange lately. We're worried about you. Maybe you should see a doctor, check on your mental state." The suggestion hit me like a cold slap. They were trying to plant doubts about my mental capacity, probably laying the groundwork for a possible legal guardianship. "My mental state is perfectly clear," I replied. "So clear that I have decided to cancel my financial participation in this wedding." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "What does that mean, exactly?" Connor asked, his voice having lost all pretense of cordiality. "It means I'm not paying 1 more cent for the expenses of this wedding. You can continue with your plans, but you will have to finance them yourselves." Jessica turned pale, and I watched the entire facade they had built for months crumble. "You can't do that," Jessica shouted, jumping to her feet. "You already signed contracts, you already committed. You're going to leave us high and dry with all the vendors." But I had expected this reaction and had my answer ready. The contracts were signed based on incomplete information and under emotional distress. My lawyer has assured me that I can withdraw my participation. Connor strode toward me with an expression that no longer tried to disguise his rage. "Mrs. Morales, I think you're making a very serious mistake. There are legal commitments involved here. You could face serious consequences if you don't follow through with what you signed." His words sounded like a direct threat, but I was no longer the scared woman from a week ago. "Are you legally threatening me in my own house?" I asked, making sure the recorder captured every word. "It's not a threat, it's a fact. You signed contracts that bind all of us." His arrogance was astonishing. He had gone from pretending to be a respectful son-in-law to acting as if he were the owner of my life and my decisions. Jessica started crying, but these tears were different from the manipulative ones from before. These were tears of frustration and rage. "Mom, how can you do this to me? After everything we've planned, after everything we've dreamed of, you're going to ruin my wedding. You're going to ruin my life." Her words were loaded with venom, each one designed to make me feel guilty. "I'm not ruining your wedding, Jessica. I'm protecting my future," I replied. "You can have any wedding you want, but not with my money." Connor paced my living room like a caged animal, clearly furious that his plan was falling apart. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. "There are ways to make an elderly person meet their obligations, especially when they're showing signs of mental instability." His words confirmed my worst suspicions. They weren't just after my money. They were prepared to question my mental capacity if I didn't cooperate. "I think it's time for you to leave my house," I said, rising from my chair with a dignity I hadn't felt in months. "And Connor, I want the key back that Jessica gave you." "I'm not giving anything back," he yelled, finally showing his true nature. "This house is going to be ours anyway. An old woman living alone in a property this big is a waste. Sooner or later you're going to need someone to take care of you, and you'd better get used to the idea that it's us." His words completely revealed the plan they had been executing from the beginning. "Get out of my life," Jessica screamed at me with a voice I had never heard before. A voice filled with pure hatred that cut through me like a burning knife. Her eyes, which once looked at me with filial love, now shone with a malice that made me step back involuntarily. "If you don't want to be part of my happiness, then don't be part of my life at all." Connor nodded behind her like a sinister chorus, his lips curved into a smile of satisfaction he no longer bothered to hide. "Perfect," I replied, my voice coming out firmer than I expected. "If that's what you really want, Jessica, you'll have it." I walked to the table where I kept my important documents and pulled out an envelope I had prepared that morning with Mr. Hayes's help. "Here is the formal cancellation of all the wedding contracts that bear my signature. As of this moment, you are fully responsible for all expenses." Connor's expression changed from triumphant to alarmed in seconds. "Wait, Mrs. Morales, you can't do that. There are penalties, there are clauses." But I had already reviewed every contract with my lawyer and knew exactly what my rights were. I can and I am. All contracts I signed under emotional distress have been legally voided. If you want to proceed with the wedding, you will have to assume all the costs yourselves. Jessica lunged for the envelope, trying to snatch it from me, but I had already put it back in my purse. "You can't do this to us. Everything is already paid for. Everything is already arranged." Her screams filled my living room, bouncing off the walls that had witnessed so many happy moments when she was little. "Yes, I can, and I already have. As you said yourself, you want me out of your life. Well, I'm getting out of your wedding, too." Connor grabbed my arm with a force that surprised me. "You are going to pay for this, Mrs. Morales. We're going to sue you for breach of contract, for emotional damages, for everything we can." His mask had fallen completely, revealing the despicable man he had always been underneath the perfect son-in-law act. "Let go of me immediately, or I'm calling the police," I said, holding up my phone. "Do it," Jessica screamed at me. "Call the police. Tell them your own mother is sabotaging your wedding. Tell them the woman who gave you life is destroying your happiness." Her words were poisoned daggers designed to cut me where it hurt most. But something strange had happened inside me. Those words that would have once torn me apart now bounced off me like raindrops on an umbrella. "You have no more power over me, Jessica," I said with a calmness that surprised even myself. "For 35 years, your happiness was my absolute priority. I sacrificed my dreams, my money, my time, everything for you. But not anymore. I will no longer finance your spectacle or your manipulation." The words poured out of me as if they had been waiting decades to be spoken. Connor began to pace my living room like a caged predator. "This isn't over, Mrs. Morales. We have rights. Jessica is your only daughter, your only family. When you're old and sick, when you need care, who do you think will be there to help you?" His words were a barely disguised threat, emotional blackmail taken to its extreme. "I'd rather be alone than in bad company," I answered. And for the first time in months, I felt I was saying exactly what I thought. "And if that's your idea of family, Connor, then I want nothing to do with either of you." Jessica burst into tears again. But these tears were different. They were tears of rage, of frustration, of someone watching something they thought they had secured slip through their fingers. "You're selfish," she screamed at me. "All your life you've been selfish. You never gave me what I needed, never gave me what I deserved." Her accusations were so absurd they almost made me laugh. I, who had worked double shifts to pay for her college, who had sold my jewelry to buy her a car, who had lived on the bare minimum so she could always have the best. "You know what, Jessica?" I said, getting up from my chair and walking to the door. "You're right. I have been selfish. I've been selfish for letting you treat me like an ATM. I've been selfish for not teaching you the value of money and hard work. I've been selfish for not setting boundaries when I should have." I opened the door wide and pointed them out. "You can't kick us out," Connor shouted. But I had already taken out my phone and dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency? I have 2 people in my home who are refusing to leave after I've asked them to go." Connor turned pale hearing my words and finally started walking toward the door. "This isn't over," Jessica muttered as she passed me. "You're going to regret this, Mom. You're going to regret this when you're all alone and no one remembers you." But her threats no longer affected me. It was as if I had developed an immunity to her venom after so many years of exposure. "Maybe," I replied. "But I'd rather regret protecting myself than regret letting you destroy me financially." Connor stopped at the threshold and looked at me with an expression I will never forget. "You don't know who you're messing with, Mrs. Morales. This is just the beginning." "On the contrary," I said, closing the door behind them. "This is over." I slid the deadbolt into place and stood in my foyer, listening to their angry voices fade down the street. For the first time in months, my house felt like my home again. The silence that followed wasn't empty, but filled with a peace I had forgotten existed. I walked to my favorite armchair and sat down, looking out the window at the garden where I had planted jasmine when Jessica was little. The flowers had grown and bloomed without my constant attention, feeding on the rain and the sun, finding their own way to thrive. Maybe it was time for me to learn to do the same. The next day, the phone started ringing early. It was Sunday, a day I used to dedicate to preparing family lunches that I now understood had been more obligation than pleasure. Each ring was like a desperate echo of the life I had decided to leave behind. Jessica called me every 20 minutes, alternating between desperate pleas and veiled threats. "Mom, please, we can fix this. You can't just end things with me like this," she said in one message. "You're going to pay for what you did," she screamed in the next. But I no longer ran to answer the phone like a trained dog. I made my morning coffee with the tranquility of someone who has made a final decision, and I sat in my garden to enjoy the morning sunday. It was strange how the same sun that shone yesterday now felt different on my skin. Warmer, more welcome, as if I had reclaimed the right to enjoy the simple things in life. At 10 o'clock in the morning, an unfamiliar car pulled up in front of my house. Connor and an older man I didn't recognize got out, dressed in suits that tried to project authority. They marched directly to my door and knocked with an insistence that bordered on aggression. "Mrs. Morales, we are legal representatives for the Morales-Garcia family. We need to speak with you about the contractual obligations you have violated." "Over you, I have no obligations to the Garcia family," I answered from behind the locked door. And if you want to discuss legal matters, you can contact my lawyer." I gave them Mr. Hayes's name and number, and I saw Connor furiously scribble it down on a piece of paper. "Mrs. Morales, this can be resolved amicably if you cooperate. There's no need to resort to legal proceedings that could be very costly for you." It was the same old blackmail, just wrapped in legal terminology. "My legal representatives are prepared for any action you wish to take," I told them, feeling a confidence I hadn't experienced in months. "Now, please leave my property, or I will call the police for trespassing." I heard them muttering to each other before they walked away, but I could catch fragments of their conversation: stubborn, mentally incompetent, other ways. That afternoon, my granddaughter Rebecca showed up at my door. Unlike her mother and Connor, she knocked softly and waited for me to open it voluntarily. Her 16-year-old eyes were swollen from crying, but there was something different in her expression, a maturity I hadn't seen before. "Grandma, can I come in? I need to talk to you." Her voice was trembling, but not with manipulation, with genuine emotion. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, hugging her for the first time in weeks without feeling like I was being evaluated or judged. Rebecca sat on the sofa where Connor had so often plotted my financial ruin, but her presence cleansed the space of all the previous toxicity. "Grandma, I heard everything that happened yesterday. Mom and Connor don't know I'm here. And what do you think about all this?" I asked, bracing myself for another emotional attack, another person trying to make me feel guilty for protecting my future. But Rebecca surprised me with her answer. "I think you did the right thing, Grandma. I've been watching how they've been treating you for months, and it wasn't right. Connor is a horrible man, and Mom is acting like someone I don't recognize." Her words were like a balm to my wounded soul. Finally, someone in my family saw what had really been happening. "Your mother is very angry with me," I said, taking her hands in mine. "This might separate us forever." Rebecca shook her head, her eyes shining with a determination that reminded me of myself at her age. "Grandma, I'm not going to choose between you, but I'm also not going to pretend I don't see what's happening. Connor is filling Mom's head with ideas about your money, your house, your future. I've heard their phone calls when they think I'm asleep." Her revelations confirmed my worst suspicions, but they also filled me with pride for my granddaughter's integrity. "What exactly have you heard?" I asked, and Rebecca took a deep breath before answering. "They talk about realtors they've already contacted to appraise the house. Connor has brochures for senior living facilities, places where, he says, you'd be more comfortable. They also mentioned something about your mental incompetence, about getting medical documents that say you can't manage your own affairs." The coldness of their plans hit me like ice water. It wasn't just greed. It was an elaborate conspiracy to control every aspect of my life. "Rebecca, what you're telling me is very serious. Would you be willing to repeat this to my lawyer?" She nodded without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect you, Grandma. You've always protected me." That night, after Rebecca left, promising to come back soon, I stayed awake planning my next move. It was no longer just a matter of protecting my money, but of protecting my freedom, my autonomy, my right to grow old with dignity in my own home. Connor and Jessica had declared war, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I pulled out all the documents I had been collecting for the past week: recordings of conversations, bank statements, canceled contracts, my granddaughter's testimony. It was a full arsenal of evidence that demonstrated the pattern of abuse and manipulation I had been suffering. But more important was the proof that my mind was perfectly clear, that my decisions were rational and justified. For the first time in months, I fell asleep, feeling completely in control of my life. I had taken the reins of my destiny, I had drawn clear boundaries, and I had found unexpected allies in my fight for dignity. Tomorrow would be another day of battle, but this time, I had the right weapons, and more importantly, I had the iron determination of a woman who had decided that enough was enough. 3 months later, I sat on the terrace of my new apartment, a bright place overlooking the park where children played and elderly couples walked hand in hand. I had sold the big house, the one Connor had coveted so much, and moved into a space that was entirely mine, chosen by me, paid for with my money, and designed for my comfort. Every piece of furniture, every curtain, every potted plant had been a decision I made without consulting anyone, without asking permission, without justifying myself to outside expectations. The lawsuit Connor had promised never materialized. My lawyer explained that after reviewing all the evidence we had gathered, including the recordings and Rebecca's testimony, any legal action against me would be not only fruitless, but potentially damaging to them. Mrs. Morales, you have a solid case if you wanted to sue them for harassment and financial abuse, Mr. Hayes had told me. But I had decided I didn't want to keep investing energy in that toxicity. I just wanted peace. Rebecca visited me every Sunday, and our relationship had become deeper and more genuine than ever. Without the pressure of family manipulations, we could talk about everything: her college plans, her dreams, life in general. Grandma, you don't regret anything? Regret protecting myself? Regret reclaiming my dignity? Never, I answered. And I could see in her eyes that she understood perfectly what had happened. Mom is very bitter, Rebecca told me. The wedding was called off because they couldn't pay for all the commitments they'd made. Connor blames her, she blames me for visiting you, and her voice broke a little. I miss my mom, but I don't miss the toxic environment she created with him. It was painful to hear about Jessica's suffering, but it was also confirmation that Connor had never been the solution to my daughter's problems, but the cause of many new ones. You know what I've learned, Rebecca? I said, stroking her young hands that looked so much like mine at her age. I've learned that true love isn't shown by sacrificing yourself to the point of self-destruction. It's shown by setting healthy boundaries, teaching values, and preserving your own integrity so you can give from a place of strength, not of lack. My words echoed in the air like a lesson that had taken me 65 years to learn. One afternoon, while I was watering the plants on my new terrace, I saw Jessica standing across the street. She looked thinner, paler, and there was something defeated in her posture that broke my heart. Our eyes met for a moment that felt eternal, charged with everything we had lost and everything we could have had. She raised her hand as if to wave, but then let it fall and walked away without a word. I didn't run after her. I didn't shout her name. I didn't open the door to beg her to talk. For the first time in her life, I let Jessica walk away without chasing her, without trying to fix what she had broken. I had learned that some doors can only be opened from the inside, and that my role as a mother was not to force reconciliations, but to be available if she ever decided to seek me out with genuine intentions. That night, Rebecca called me crying. Grandma, Mom is doing really bad. Connor left her when he realized there was no more money to get from us. He left with all his things and stuck her with the debts from the wedding that never happened. My heart clenched hearing about my daughter's pain, but I also felt a strange sense of justice. Connor had finally shown his true colors, just as I had predicted. Do you want me to go see her? I asked Rebecca, knowing that any approach from me could be misinterpreted or rejected. I don't know, Grandma. She's very proud, very hurt, but I think, deep down, she knows you were right about him. The wisdom of my 16-year-old granddaughter constantly impressed me. She had seen firsthand what manipulation could do to a family, and she had chosen the side of honesty. 6 months after the last time I saw Jessica on the street, I received a letter. Not a text message, not a phone call, but a letter handwritten on stationery I recognized as the set I had given her years ago. Mom, it began, I know I have no right to write to you after everything that happened, but I need you to know that I understand now what Connor really was. I also understand that my actions were unforgivable. The letter continued with apologies that sounded genuine, with acknowledgments of mistakes that seemed to come from a place of real pain, not manipulation. I'm not writing to ask you for money, or for you to rescue me from the consequences of my decisions. I'm writing because I want you to know that I admire you for standing up for yourself when I was not capable of defending you. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I read the words I had hoped to hear for months. If you can ever forgive me, I would like to try to rebuild our relationship from scratch, as two adults who respect each other, not as a mother and daughter trapped in the toxic patterns of the past. She signed it simply, Jessica, not your daughter, as she used to, as if she understood that family titles had to be earned, not taken for granted. That afternoon, as the sun set on my new life, I planted a mint seedling in a new pot. Mint, the plant seller had explained, was resilient and constantly regenerated, even after being cut. As I tucked the small roots into the fresh soil, I thought about second chances, about the forgiveness that comes from strength and not weakness, about the possibility of something beautiful growing in the place where there had once been so much pain. I didn't know if Jessica and I would ever be mother and daughter again in the traditional sense, but for the first time in years, I had hoped that we could be something better. Two women who respected each other, who loved each other from an appropriate distance, and who had learned that true love sometimes requires painful but necessary boundaries. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of fresh mint, knowing that I had found my way back to myself.